The isolation of Lookout Tower 7 had become my sanctuary. 3 months into my assignment at Shoshone National Forest in Wyoming, I'd grown accustomed to the creaking of the wooden structure, the endless green canopy stretching in every direction, and the ritual of scanning the horizon for wisps of smoke. After my divorce, this solitude wasn't just welcome, it was necessary. I set my coffee mug on the observation desk and picked up my binoculars for the afternoon scan. The July heat made the tower hot, even with open windows. My shirt clung to my back as I methodically checked each quadrant. Section 4 clear. I muttered to myself, logging the entry in my notebook. My daily routine had become second nature. Wake at dawn, check weather conditions, log any overnight changes, update maps, scan for signs of fire, and repeat the cycle until sunset. Occasionally I'd spot hikers on the main trail, but visitors were rare this far out. Most people who ventured into the backcountry preferred the scenic routes closer to the park entrance. The radio crackled suddenly, startling me enough that I nearly knocked over my mug. Static hissed through the speaker before a voice broke through, distorted and urgent. Alan Peterson grabbed the handset. "This is Tower 7. Go ahead, danger coming." The voice was barely audible through waves of interference. "Not what seems. Repeat your message, I can't understand you." "Over." "More static then. They're coming. Prepare." Before dissolving into unintelligible noise, I tried several more times to re-establish contact, switching channels and adjusting the frequency, but received nothing but empty static. The transmission hadn't followed standard protocol. No identification, no proper radio etiquette. Even stranger was how the voice had known my name. Only headquarters and the other watchtowers in the network had that information. I reached for the satellite phone and dialed headquarters. "Shoshone Forestry Services," a woman's voice answered. "This is Alan Peterson at Tower 7. I just received an unusual radio transmission. Has anyone reported similar interference?" Negative, Tower 7. All stations reported normal communications at the last check-in. "What kind of interference?" I hesitated, not wanting to sound paranoid. Someone called me by name, mentioned something about danger. The signal was weak and broke up. Could be someone pulled my information from the registry and decided to play a prank. I'll alert the other towers to report any unusual transmissions. Probably just some hikers who got their hands on a radio. "Unless you need immediate assistance?" "No, I'm fine. Just checking." After hanging up, I contacted the two nearest towers. Both reported clear communications and no strange activity. By evening, I'd convinced myself it was either a misdirected transmission or someone's idea of a joke. These towers were notorious for pranks among seasonal workers trying to make their boring days more interesting. That night, sleep came fitfully. The tower creaked more than usual, as though straining against a wind that wasn't there. Twice I got up to check the supports, finding nothing amiss. Around 3 a.m., I could have sworn I heard footsteps on the stairs. But when I investigated with my flashlight, the stairwell was empty. Morning light chased away the unease. I brewed coffee and settled into my chair for the day's first scan. Radio call all but forgotten. The forest looked peaceful, bathed in golden sunlight. Still, something felt off. I checked the weather reports on my computer. Clear skies predicted for the next 5 days. Yet when I looked to the northwest, dark clouds had begun gathering over the distant mountains. Weather could change quickly in these parts, but those clouds looked scary, almost unnatural, in how they seemed to boil rather than drift. By midday, I tried calling headquarters for an updated forecast, but found my satellite phone showed no service. I'd never lost signal before, not even during the worst storms. I tapped the device against my palm and tried again. Nothing. "Great," I muttered. At least the radio still worked for emergency communications. Around 4 in the afternoon, I caught movement in my peripheral vision while scanning Sector 6. I swung my binoculars back, focusing on a small clearing about 2 miles out. A figure walked through the tall grass with purpose. This wasn't a casual hiker. They were coming straight through the dense forest rather than following any established trail. Most visitors approached from the south along the maintained path. This person was cutting directly toward my tower from the west, through terrain so rough most rangers avoided it. I tracked their progress for 20 minutes. They walked efficiently, as though they knew the landscape well, yet something about their gait seemed off, too fluid maybe, too direct. Protocol required me to assist anyone who might be in distress. Even with the strange radio call from yesterday nagging at me, I couldn't ignore potential emergency situations. It was part of my job. I gathered medical supplies, set out water bottles, and prepared the guest cot in case they needed to stay overnight. As the figure emerged from the tree line and began ascending the path to my tower, the sky darkened prematurely. The strange clouds had rolled in faster than any natural weather system I'd ever witnessed, turning late afternoon to early evening in a matter of minutes. I turned on the exterior lights, illuminating the path up to the tower. Through my binoculars, I could now make out more details. Male, average height, wearing what appeared to be hiking clothes, though they looked oddly clean for someone who'd been bushwhacking through dense forest. He carried no visible backpack or gear. My hand hovered over the radio. I should report this visitor to headquarters, but something held me back. Maybe it was the timing, too coincidental after yesterday's warning. Maybe it was the approach, too deliberate through impossible terrain. Or maybe it was just instinct, that prickle at the back of my neck telling me something wasn't right. I set down the binoculars and checked my hunting knife in its sheath. Then I went to the top of the stairs, watching through the window as my visitor climbed the final stretch toward Tower 7. The tower creaked again, the same unnatural sound from last night, as though responding to the approaching stranger. Night was falling rapidly around us. I took a deep breath and prepared to greet whoever or whatever had made such an effort to reach this isolated outpost. A fire watcher's job included helping lost hikers, but something about this visitor set my instincts on edge. 3 sharp knocks rang through the tower. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Hello there," I said, forcing a neutral tone. "You're a long way from any trail." The man stood unsteadily in the doorway. His clothes were dirty and wrinkled, but in a way that seemed deliberate, rather than the result of days in the wilderness. His face was smudged with dirt, yet his skin beneath looked oddly fresh. "Got lost," he said, his voice raspy but not parched. "Been wandering for days." I stepped back, allowing him inside while keeping my distance. "Come in, you must be exhausted." The stranger stepped into the tower, moving too smoothly for someone claiming days of exposure. His eyes darted around the room, staying too long on my equipment rather than the chair or water I'd set out. "I'm Alan, the fire watcher for this sector. Let me get you some water." He nodded but said nothing. Continuing to look around the room with a creepy focus, I grabbed a bottle from my supplies and handed it to him. "Here, how long did you say you've been out there? 4 days, maybe 5. He took the water but only wetted his lips without actually drinking, lost track of time. I studied him more carefully. No cracked lips, no sunburn, no signs of dehydration. Even his stubble looked like a day's growth at most. "You're in pretty good shape for someone lost that long. What's your name?" He paused a beat too long. "Miller. John Miller." The way he said it sounded like a question. I gestured to the table where I'd laid out some protein bars and dried fruit. "Hungry? I've got some basic supplies." "Not really hungry." His attention moved to my radio equipment. "That working?" "Sometimes reception gets spotty, but it's reliable enough." I moved toward the radio, watching his reaction. "I should call this in. Let headquarters know you're safe. They can arrange transport back to civilization in the morning." His face changed quickly. No need for that." He stepped between me and the radio. "Don't want to trouble anyone. I'll be on my way at first light. It's no trouble. It's protocol, actually." I reached past him for the radio handset. "Plus, they'll want to know how you ended up so far off trail." He didn't move, but his eyes squinted slightly. I turned on the radio anyway, and immediately harsh static filled the room. I adjusted the frequency, tried the backup channels. Nothing but white noise. "Strange," I muttered. "It was working earlier today." The stranger gave an odd smile. "Interference, probably. Happens in these mountains." I set the handset down, not believing him for a second. "Right. Well, you should rest. You can use my sleeping bag tonight." I pointed to the rolled mat I'd prepared near the wood stove. "I'll take the chair. I'm on night watch anyway." "Very kind," he said, walking around the tower's main room, touching my scanning equipment, maps, and logbooks. "Fascinating job you have, all alone up here watching for fires. It has its moments." I kept my eyes on him while checking the perimeter alarms on my control panel, all active. Were you hiking alone? Anyone else we should be looking for? No one else, he replied, picking up my binoculars and looking through them at the darkness outside. Just me out there. He put them down and looked at me. Just us up here. I felt uneasy and moved so I could reach the knife at my hip easily. How far is the next tower from here? He asked casually. About 20 miles southeast, I lied, watching his reaction. The nearest tower was actually 12 miles northeast. He nodded, seemingly accepting this. And the closed ones? I heard some were shut down after the big fire a few years back. I got worried. How would a lost hiker know about closed fire towers? I wouldn't know much about those, I said. I've only been stationed here 3 months. But you've seen the records, he asked, gesturing toward my file cabinet. The logs, the reports. You've read about Tower 12, haven't you? I kept my face blank despite feeling very alarmed. Tower 12 wasn't marked on public maps. Look, you should get some rest. We can talk more in the morning. He looked at me for several seconds before nodding. Yes, morning. Though we don't have much time. Plenty of time to sort everything out tomorrow, I said, trying to sound reassuring. I spent the next few hours pretending to work while watching him carefully. He laid on the sleeping bag but never closed his eyes. Every time I looked directly at him, he was watching me with that same creepy smile. Around 11, I announced I needed to perform the night scan. He sat up immediately. I'll just rest in here, I said, pointing to my small private quarters at the back of the tower. Get some sleep. I slipped inside, locked the door, and collapsed into my bunk. The hunting knife rested against my chest. Despite my exhaustion, I forced myself to stay awake, listening to his footsteps as he continued to pace around the main room. Eventually, the tower fell silent. My watch ticked to midnight as I struggled to stay awake. Just 5 minutes, I told myself, closing my eyes. A soft scratching sound jolted me awake. Metal against metal, the lock on my door. I grabbed my knife and moved silently to the door. Through the crack beneath, I could see a shadow moving. Something thin and metallic worked at the deadbolt. Not a key, but some improvised lockpick. I yanked the door open. The stranger stood there, bent over my lock, a straightened paperclip in his hand. Behind him, I could see my gun cabinet was already open, the padlock lying broken on the floor. What the hell are you doing? I held my knife ready. Instead of looking guilty or surprised, he smiled, unnaturally wide. His teeth looked too white in the dim light. You're not ready yet, but you will be, he said, his voice different now, smoother and more confident. They're coming soon. Who's coming? Who are you? I asked firmly, keeping the knife between us. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then plunged the tower into darkness. I lunged forward, knife extended, but connected with nothing but air. The emergency lights kicked on 5 seconds later, casting a dull red glow through the tower. He was gone. Hello? I called out, knife raised as I moved through the main room. Where did you go? The tower was empty. I checked the stairwell, the only way down from the tower, but found it deserted. The front door remained locked from the inside, just as I'd left it before retiring to my quarters. I searched every corner, every possible hiding place. Nothing. The sleeping bag lay undisturbed where he'd pretended to rest earlier. The only evidence of his presence was the broken padlock on my gun cabinet and the bent paperclip on the floor by my quarters. I grabbed my rifle from the cabinet and checked the tower's single staircase again. There was simply nowhere he could have gone. The fall from any window would have been fatal, and I would have heard the crash if he'd attempted it. I barricaded myself in my private quarters for the remainder of the night, rifle across my lap, knife at my side. I didn't sleep. Every creak of the tower sent adrenaline surging through my veins. When morning finally arrived, I emerged cautiously. The tower remained empty. I checked the satellite phone, dead despite being fully charged the day before. I tried the radio again and got nothing but static. After securing the tower, I went down the stairs with my rifle and walked around the base. The ground was soft from recent rain, perfect for tracking. Yet I found no footprints leading away from the tower. Only the single set of prints approaching from the west, the ones he'd made when arriving. It was like he disappeared completely. Back in the tower, I forced myself to eat and drink while I inspected my equipment. Nothing was missing, but several items had been moved slightly. My logbooks, maps of the region, and emergency protocols were all just slightly out of place. By mid-morning, I finally got the radio working. "Tower 7 to headquarters over," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. After a long pause, a response came through. "Headquarters here. Go ahead, Tower 7. I reported the incident, describing the stranger and his mysterious disappearance. The dispatcher sounded concerned, but skeptical. "We'll send someone out to check on you in the next day or two," she promised. "In the meantime, keep your tower secured and maintain regular radio contact." "Copy that," I replied, not mentioning that regular radio contact had been impossible just hours earlier. For the next 2 days, I maintained my duties while remaining on high alert. I kept the rifle within reach at all times, slept with my door barricaded and knife beside my pillow. Several times I thought I heard footsteps circling the tower at night, but when I checked, I found nothing. The stranger's words stuck with me. "They're coming soon." Who was coming? And how had he vanished from a tower with only one exit? As I scanned the forest on the second evening, I kept looking to the northwest, where those unnatural clouds had first appeared. Something was happening in these woods, something I couldn't explain. The warning from the radio, the visitor who vanished, they were connected somehow. I just needed to figure out how before whoever they were arrived. I kept my eyes locked on the northwestern horizon, searching for any sign of those unnatural clouds returning. Night had fallen hours ago, leaving only darkness where the boiling clouds had been. My rifle rested across my lap, loaded and ready. "They're coming soon." The stranger's words played on a loop in my mind. Who? When? And how had he vanished from a tower with only one exit? I rubbed my tired eyes and checked my watch. Past midnight, another sleepless night stretched ahead of me. 2 days passed with constant watchfulness and tiredness. I maintained my normal duties, logging reports and scanning for fires, but I just went through the motions. I was just trying to survive. I'd barricaded the stairwell door each night and slept with my rifle within reach, if you could call fitful dozing sleep. Headquarters had finally responded to my report about the stranger. "We'll send someone to investigate as soon as possible," the dispatcher promised, likely within the next day or two. I didn't expect much. In my 3 months as a fire watcher, I'd learned that as soon as possible usually meant when convenient. Being alone, which I used to enjoy, now made me feel exposed. I'd taken to carrying my hunting knife everywhere, even to the bathroom. The broken lock on my gun cabinet was a constant reminder that the stranger had been real, not some hallucination born from isolation. On the third night after his disappearance, I stood at my observation window doing my evening scan. The forest looked peaceful in the fading light. Too peaceful, perhaps. I'd noticed fewer animal calls over the past days, as if the wildlife sensed something wasn't right. I swept my binoculars methodically across each section, pausing occasionally to make notes in my log. When I reached the northeastern quadrant, something caught my eye. A faint blue light pulsed in the distance, barely visible against the darkening sky. I adjusted my binoculars, focusing on the source. The light came from the direction of Tower 12, a decommissioned observation post about 15 miles away. According to my maps, that tower had been abandoned after a forest fire damaged the area 5 years ago. The light pulsed with an odd rhythm, 3 quick flashes followed by a longer pause, then repeating. Definitely not natural. Not a campfire or lightning. This was deliberate, artificial. I checked my maps again. Tower 12 hadn't been marked for official use in years. It should have no power, no personnel. According to the status reports I'd reviewed during my orientation, it was slated for demolition once the Forest Service budget allowed. So why was it lighting up like a beacon? I tried the satellite phone again, but it remained dead. Frustration built in my chest as I set it down and reached for the radio instead. Before I could transmit, the radio crackled to life on its own. Static hissed through the speaker, followed by that same distorted voice I'd heard days ago. "Don't go to the tower." I snatched up the handset. "Who is this?" How are you accessing this frequency? Something dangerous waits there. The voice ignored my questions. They're using it as a beacon. A beacon for what? Who are you? I demanded, gripping the handset tighter. You know me better than you realize. The voice seemed closer somehow, less distorted. We don't have much time. I glanced back toward the pulsing light, then to the radio. Are you at Tower 12? Is that how you know about the light? No. Stay away from there. Urgency filled the voice. Watch for imposters. They'll come wearing faces, you know. What does that mean? Imposters? Who? Static overwhelmed the transmission, cutting off any response. I tried changing frequencies, adjusting settings, even banging the unit against the desk in frustration. Nothing worked. The light continued its rhythmic pulsing across the miles of forest that separated us. 3 quick flashes. Pause. Repeat. Sleep wasn't an option. I pulled out the station records looking for anything related to Tower 12. Most of the files contained standard maintenance logs and weather reports, but buried in the back of the filing cabinet I found a folder marked Incident Reports Restricted. Inside were several documents detailing strange occurrences around Tower 12 over the years. Rangers reported equipment malfunctions, compasses spinning wildly, and, most disturbing, periods of lost time while patrolling near the tower. The most recent reports concerned Douglas Finch, a fire watcher who'd been stationed in my tower before me. According to the file, Finch had begun reporting strange lights in the forest 6 months ago. His logs became increasingly erratic, filled with descriptions of patterns in the movement and communications through light. The official record attributed his behavior to psychological breakdown from prolonged isolation. After Finch failed to check in for 3 consecutive days, a search team was dispatched. They found the tower empty, his belongings still in place. Douglas Finch had simply vanished. The final page was a recommendation to close Tower 7, my tower, permanently. Someone had scrawled across it in red ink. Denied. No evidence of environmental factors. Psychological evaluation for future personnel. That explained the unusual length of my psychological screening before being assigned here. They'd been looking for someone stable, someone who wouldn't crack like Finch apparently had. I set the files aside and returned to the window. The blue light continued its steady pulse. Despite the voice's warning, I felt drawn to it. If there were answers about what was happening, they would be at Tower 12. I pulled out my topographical maps and began planning a route. The direct path would take me through some rough terrain, but I could make it in a full day's hike if I left at first light. I marked potential water sources and places to rest along the way. As I worked, a soft scraping sound came from outside. I grabbed my rifle and moved to the window. The sound circled the tower's perimeter, footsteps moving slowly, deliberately around the base of my tower. I checked the perimeter alarm panel. All indicators showed green. Nothing had triggered the sensors. The footsteps continued their circuit, unhurried, as if whoever made them knew I was listening and didn't care. They completed a full circle, paused beneath my window, then slowly moved away into the forest. I felt tense as I watched the tree line, but saw nothing move in the darkness. I returned to my maps, focusing on the task at hand while trying to ignore the coldness creeping up my spine. If I was going to investigate Tower 12, I needed to be prepared. I pulled my backpack from the storage closet and began packing essentials: water, food, first aid supplies, compass, flashlight. After a moment's hesitation, I added extra batteries for my radio. Whatever or whoever was sending those transmissions seemed to know what was happening. If that voice was my only source of information, I needed to keep communication possible. As I finished my preparations, I glanced once more at the blue light pulsing in the distance. 3 flashes, pause, repeat. It could be a sign, it could be a warning, or it could be a trap. Despite my instincts telling me to stay put, to wait for headquarters to send help, I knew I wouldn't be able to resist investigating. The stranger had disappeared completely. The voice on the radio knew my name and warned of danger, and now a decommissioned tower was sending signals across miles of wilderness. All signs pointed to Tower 12. All warnings told me to stay away. I set my alarm for dawn and tried to rest, knowing full well that sleep would be impossible with all my unanswered questions and the memory of those footsteps circling my tower. Tomorrow I would find answers, regardless of the consequences. The sound of an engine broke the morning silence, pulling me from a fitful sleep. I bolted upright, my hand instinctively reaching for the rifle I'd kept beside my bed. The sky was just turning orange and pink as I moved to the window. A Forest Service Jeep bumped along the access road, its green paint standing out against the surrounding trees. My shoulders tensed. The promised help from headquarters had arrived sooner than expected. I splashed water on my face and grabbed my jacket, not bothering to change the clothes I'd slept in. The backpack I'd prepared sat by the door, ready for my planned expedition to Tower 12. I briefly considered hiding it, then decided against it. Official rangers came through here regularly, and having hiking gear ready wouldn't seem suspicious. The Jeep parked at the base of my tower. A man in a crisp Forest Service uniform stepped out, adjusting his hat before looking up toward my window. Something about his posture struck me as odd. I grabbed my knife and tucked it into my belt at the small of my back, then headed down to meet him. "Alan," the ranger called out with fake friendliness as I descended the stairs. "Good to see you, buddy." I froze halfway down. His tone suggested we were old friends, but I'd never seen this man before in my life. "Morning," I responded cautiously, continuing down the stairs. "You're from headquarters?" "Kevin Hartwell," he said, extending his hand with a broad smile. "Don't tell me you've forgotten me already. We had that long chat about the fishing spots near Buffalo Creek last month when I delivered your supplies." I shook his hand, feeling the hairs on my neck rise. His grip was firm but oddly cold despite the summer heat. "Sorry, been a long few days," I said, looking at his face. "Lot on my mind." Kevin laughed, the sound too practiced. "No problem. You were pretty distracted talking about your divorce anyway. How's that going? Still getting those papers finalized?" My divorce had been finalized 2 months ago before I even took this assignment. I had mentioned it briefly during my intake interview, but nothing since. "All done now," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Come on up, I've got coffee." Kevin followed me up to the tower, his boots making precise measured sounds on each step. Inside, he walked directly to the small kitchenette and reached for the left cupboard. "You still keeping the coffee over here instead of with the other supplies?" he asked, pulling out my half-empty bag of grounds without waiting for a response. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. I'd never shown anyone my personal organization system. I preferred keeping coffee separate from my emergency supplies, but wasn't something anyone would know unless they'd watched me. "Yeah, old habits," I said, leaning against the desk while Kevin moved around my kitchen like he knew it too well. "So headquarters sent you about my report, the intruder?" "Partly," Kevin replied, measuring coffee with military precision, but also checking in on all remote stations. "Had some strange reports lately. I decided to test him. I was actually planning a hike today. Thought I'd check out Tower 12, see if there's anything to those lights I reported." The change was instant. Kevin's fluid movement stuttered. He set down the coffee scoop very slowly and turned to face me. "Tower 12? His voice remained pleasant, but his eyes had hardened. "That's not a good idea, Alan. That structure was condemned years ago after the fire damage, completely unsafe." "I wasn't planning to climb it," I lied, just curious about the area. Kevin's smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No need for that. We're sending a specialized team later this week." He resumed making coffee. "Did you know Douglas Finch was obsessed with that tower?" "Finch? The missing fire watcher?" I asked, pretending I hadn't just read his file last night. "Yes. Poor guy started showing signs of instability about 6 months into his assignment." Kevin shook his head with manufactured sympathy, started reporting strange lights, then began lighting pattern fires himself. "We think he might still be out there." "You think Finch is sending the radio transmissions?" I asked. Kevin nodded. "Makes the most sense. He knows the frequencies, the protocols. Probably the same person who broke into your tower." He poured 2 cups of coffee, handing one to me. "That's why I want you to stay put. Let our specialized team handle it." I accepted the coffee, but didn't drink. "When did you leave headquarters this morning?" "Around 5 a.m., Kevin answered without hesitation. "Wanted to get here early." I glanced at his watch as he raised his cup. It showed 8:20, but my tower clock read 7:45. The drive from headquarters took less than 2 hours. You came through the eastern marshland, I asked. Heard that trail got flooded after the rain. It did, Kevin confirmed, taking a sip of coffee. Had to take it slow through the mud. I looked down at his boots. They had dried mud caked around the edges, but it was flaking off rather than still damp. The marshland would have left them soaking wet if he'd passed through this morning. Well, I appreciate you coming out, I said, setting my untouched coffee aside. Want to check my equipment while you're here? Make sure everything's functioning correctly. Good idea, Kevin replied, seemingly pleased with the suggestion. For the next hour, I watched him inspect every piece of equipment in the tower. He checked my radio, weather instruments, computer and scanning equipment with methodical precision. His knowledge of the systems was thorough, yet something felt mechanical about his movements. Everything looks operational, he finally declared, closing the access panel on my radio. Your satellite phone giving you any more trouble? I hadn't mentioned problems with my satellite phone. Not since yesterday, I said carefully. Seems to be working now. Good, good. Kevin nodded, looking at my backpack by the door. Planning a hike despite my warning. Just standard preparedness. I replied, never know when I might need to respond to an emergency in my sector. Kevin smiled, always the professional Alan. That's why they value you out here. He glanced at his watch. I should head back. I'll return tomorrow with some fresh supplies for you. That would be great, I said, walking him to the door, the usual route back to headquarters. Of course, he replied smoothly, unless you'd recommend a scenic detour. The question felt like a test. Stick to the main route, I advised. Some of those side trails can get confusing if you don't know them well. Right you are. Kevin descended the stairs with that same measured pace. At the bottom he turned and waved. Lock up tight tonight, Alan. Don't open the door for anyone but me, understand? The command in his tone was unmistakable beneath the friendly veneer. Will do, I called back, watching as he climbed into his Jeep. I waited until the vehicle disappeared around the first bend before rushing to gather my binoculars. From my observation platform, I tracked the Jeep's progress through gaps in the trees. After about 2 miles, it should have turned southeast toward headquarters. Instead, it continued straight west toward Tower 12. I swept the tower, checking every corner and storage space, suddenly aware of what was missing. My satellite phone was gone from its charging station. Kevin had taken it. Removing my only reliable communication with the outside world, I grabbed my backpack and quickly inventoried the contents: water, protein bars, first aid kit, flashlight, spare batteries, compass, maps. I added my journal, extra ammunition for the rifle, and a small pair of binoculars. My hunting rifle came last, loaded and secured for travel. Whatever was happening, Kevin, if that was even his real name, was at the center of it. His knowledge of my personal habits, the inconsistencies in his story, and now his unauthorized detour to Tower 12 all confirmed my suspicions. The voice on the radio had warned about danger. The stranger had vanished without a trace. Now a ranger who knew too much was heading toward the mysterious tower that shouldn't have lights. I locked the tower behind me and descended the stairs, rifle in hand. Kevin had about a 30-minute head start, but he was in a vehicle restricted to roads and trails. On foot, I could take more direct routes through the forest. The weight of the pack settled against my shoulders as I set off, keeping low and using the trees for cover. I'd track Kevin at a safe distance, discover what he was doing at Tower 12, and maybe finally get some answers about what was happening in my forest. The morning sun filtered through the canopy as I moved west, following game trails and using my compass to maintain direction. Every few minutes I stopped to listen, alert for any sign of pursuit or danger. Kevin had said not to trust anyone, but the person I trusted least right now was Kevin himself. The forest thickened as I moved deeper into unknown territory. 5 miles of tracking, Kevin had led me through increasingly rough terrain. The well-marked trails had given way to dense undergrowth and steep ravines that slowed my progress. Sweat soaked through my shirt despite the shade from the towering pines. I paused at a small clearing to check my compass again. Kevin's Jeep had left clear tracks on the service roads initially, but he'd eventually turned onto an unmarked path that didn't appear on any of my maps. Now I was navigating purely by intuition and occasional tire marks, where the ground was soft enough to hold an impression. The sun had passed its zenith and hung in the western sky. In a few hours it would set, and I'd be stuck out here in the dark. My gut told me to turn back, but something about Tower 12 and its mysterious lights pulled me forward. I took a swig from my canteen and wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. Something felt wrong about the forest today. The usual background noise of birds and insects had decreased the further west I traveled. Now, a strange quiet surrounded me, broken only by the occasional creak of branches in the wind. My radio crackled to life without warning, making me jump. "Alan, turn back now." The same distorted voice from before cut through static. "They know you're following. They're coming for you before sunset." I fumbled for the handset, nearly dropping it in my haste. "Who is this? What do you mean they're coming?" I demanded, scanning the trees around me. No time to explain everything. The voice sounded clearer than before, almost like someone I knew. "You've been through this before. Each cycle they get closer. The note in your left boot will explain." I froze. "What note? What are you talking about? Check your left boot, now." The urgency in the voice left no room for argument. I set down my pack and rifle, keeping them within reach as I unlaced my left hiking boot. The sock came off next, and I ran my fingers inside the boot, feeling along the insole. My fingertips caught on something tucked beneath the arch support, a small folded piece of paper I had no memory of placing there. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably mine, though I had no recollection of writing it. "If you're reading this, they've already found you and reset the cycle. The Rangers aren't Rangers. Stay away from Tower 12. It's a trap. They use it to lure you in every time. Don't trust anyone with a uniform, especially Kevin. He'll seem to know your habits because he studied you through previous cycles. If you're reading this, it's already the 5th cycle. Run." I stared at the note. 5th cycle. Reset. None of it made sense, yet the handwriting was definitely mine. The distinctive way I crossed my T's and the slight leftward slant couldn't be imitated. The radio crackled again. "You found it." It wasn't a question. "I don't understand," I said, tucking the note into my pocket and pulling my sock and boot back on. "How did this get here? I don't remember writing it." "You wouldn't. They wipe your memory at the end of each cycle." The voice paused. "You have to trust yourself. You left that note for yourself before the last reset." "Who are they?" I asked, lacing my boot with shaking fingers. "The Rangers?" "Yes, but they're not Rangers. Not human. There's more written on the back of the note." I pulled the paper out again and flipped it over. A list of items was scrawled across the back: rifle plus all ammo, compass southeast sector maps, water purification tablets, metal box under floorboard beneath desk. Use the emergency exit when they come. "I need to get back to the tower," I said, more to myself than the radio. "Yes, right now." "They're moving faster this cycle. You have maybe 3 hours before sunset." The voice became urgent. "Get what's on that list and get out. Don't wait for them to come to you." "Who are you?" I demanded, shoving the note back in my pocket and gathering my gear. "How do you know all this?" A long pause followed before the voice responded. Softer now. "I'm you, Alan, from the end of the last cycle. I don't have time to explain how this works. Just get back to the tower and find the metal box. Everything you need to understand is in there." The radio went silent. I tried calling again but received nothing but static. I turned east, my mind racing with questions as I started the long trek back to my tower. If Kevin had gone to Tower 12, I'd be moving directly away from him, which seemed like the smartest course of action given the warning. My pace quickened with each passing minute. The growing shadows and trees seemed to reach for me as I moved. Twice, I thought I heard movement parallel to my path. But when I stopped to listen, there was only silence. 2 hours of hard hiking brought me to territory I recognized. I'd made better time returning than I had setting out, driven by a growing sense of dread. As I approached the final ridge overlooking my tower, I dropped to my stomach and crawled forward. What I saw through the trees stopped my breath. 5 Forest Service jeeps were parked at the base of my tower. A group of uniformed rangers stood in a loose circle, heads bent together as if in quiet conference. Kevin stood among them, the same Kevin who should have been miles away, heading toward Tower 12. I raised my binoculars for a closer look. I felt cold fear as I observed them. All 5 rangers stood with identical postures, feet planted at exactly the same width, hands clasped behind their backs in precisely the same manner. Even more disturbing, they all wore Kevin's face. 5 identical men in ranger uniforms, positioned like mannequins around my tower. As I watched, they broke their huddle with synchronized movements, spreading out to establish a perimeter around the tower. Their gaits matched perfectly. Right foot, left foot, precise and mechanical. Then, as if sensing my presence, all 5 heads turned simultaneously toward my position on the ridge. The movement was so uniform, so unnatural, that I felt deeply unsettled. 5 identical faces stared in my direction with empty expressions. I ducked below the ridge line. They couldn't have seen me from that distance, could they? I crawled backward until I was safely hidden by trees, then circled around, using the dense forest as cover. If I approached from the north instead of the east, I might reach the tower stairs without being spotted. 30 minutes of careful movement brought me to the back of the tower. I could hear voices now, all with the same timbre and cadence, all sounding like Kevin. He'll return soon. The pattern remains consistent. Prepare for extraction before darkness. The cycle nears completion. Their empty tones worried me more than any shouted threat could have. I crouched in the underbrush, watching as 2 of the Kevin Rangers moved toward the forest edge, sweeping the area in a search pattern. The remaining 3 positioned themselves around the tower's base. I needed to get inside, but they had the ground floor surrounded. My only chance was to wait for an opening and make a dash for the stairs. When one of the Rangers moved to check something in his jeep, a small gap appeared in their formation. I took my chance, sprinting from my hiding place toward the tower stairs. There! The shout came in perfect unison from all 3 Rangers. I took the stairs 2 at a time, the wood creaking beneath my pounding boots. Behind me I heard the synchronized footfalls of multiple pursuers. At the top, I fumbled with my keys, jammed one into the lock, and threw myself inside the tower. I slammed the door shut and twisted the deadbolt just as the first Ranger reached the landing. 3 sharp knocks rattled the door, identical in rhythm and force. Alan Peterson opened the door. Kevin's voice, but flatter, emptier than before. I backed away. I forgot something, I called, hoping to buy time. Give me a minute. The cycle is ending. We must prepare you for transfer. The voice lacked any inflection. Open the door immediately. I grabbed the desk chair and wedged it under the doorknob, then piled my small bookshelf against it. It wouldn't hold them long, but I needed time to find what the note had mentioned, the floor beneath my desk. I dropped to my knees and ran my fingers along the wooden planks, searching for any sign of a loose board. Near the back corner, my fingernails caught on a seam. I pried at it, and the board lifted slightly, more pounding at the door. Final warning, Alan Peterson. Open or we will enter by force. I ignored the voice and worked my fingers into the gap, pulling upward. The board came free, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside lay a metal ammunition box, dented and scratched, but securely latched. I pulled it out and flipped the latch. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a folded map with markings I didn't recognize. The first heavy impact hit the door, making the hinges groan. I grabbed my backpack and started filling it with the items from the list. My rifle and remaining ammunition, the compass from my desk drawer, southeast sector maps from the filing cabinet, the water purification tablets from my emergency kit. I stuffed the journal and map from the metal box into my pack last, then slung it over my shoulders. Another crash against the door splintered the wood around the top hinge. I needed an exit strategy, the emergency exit. I'd never used it before. It was a small hatch in the floor on the opposite side of the tower, designed as a fire escape. A metal cable ran from it to the ground, allowing for a controlled slide down if the stairs were compromised. I rushed to the hatch and twisted the release mechanism. It opened with a creak of disused hinges, revealing the metal cable disappearing into the growing dusk below. The door to the tower burst inward, chair and bookshelf tumbling aside. 5 identical Rangers stood in the doorway, moving as one unit. The cycle must continue, they said in perfect unison. I didn't wait to hear more. I gripped the cable with gloved hands and dropped through the hatch, sliding down toward the forest floor as synchronized footsteps crossed the tower above me. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky blood red. The cycle, whatever it was ending, and I was running out of time. The cable burned through my gloves as I slid down from my tower, the friction heating the metal despite the cool evening air. My boots hit the ground with a heavy thud, pain shooting through my ankles at the impact. I didn't have time to recover. Above me, 5 identical faces peered down through the emergency hatch, moving in that disturbing synchronization that confirmed they weren't human. I sprinted for the tree line, the weight of my backpack bouncing against my spine. I entered the darkening forest as behind me came the sounds of pursuit, not frantic or chaotic as humans would make, but rhythmic and measured. 5 sets of boots hitting the ground in perfect unison. Alan Peterson. The cycle is incomplete. Their voices carried through the trees, a single voice multiplied by 5. My lungs burned as I pushed deeper into the forest, using the fading light to navigate between dense pines and overfallen logs. My compass pointed east, but instinct told me to head north first to throw off their pursuit before circling back toward my intended destination. The sounds of the rangers faded briefly, then returned with unsettling persistence. They didn't tire or slow, maintaining the same mechanical pace regardless of terrain. When it became completely dark, I flicked on my flashlight just long enough to check my compass, then plunged it back into my pocket. Hours passed in a blur of desperate movement. Whenever I thought I'd lost them, their synchronized footsteps would emerge again from the darkness, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always coming. My muscles were extremely tired, my mouth parched despite rationing my water. Near midnight, I paused at the edge of a small clearing to get my bearings. Moonlight illuminated the space just enough to see a ridge of rocky outcroppings to my left. I pulled out the folded map from the metal box, squinting at it in the dim light. A crude drawing showed a series of hills and a small X-marked blind spot near my current position. Beneath it, more of my own handwriting. They can't see the cave. Don't know why. Use it. I studied the rocky hillside, searching for any sign of an opening. As I approached the base of the ridge, the ranger's footsteps grew louder behind me. My flashlight beam bounced across the stone face until it caught on a narrow gap between boulders, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I shut off my light and listened. 5 sets of footsteps approached the clearing, then stopped, their voices carried across the night air. Signal lost, the perimeter expanded. Continue eastward. He follows the established pattern. Their confidence chilled me. What pattern? How many times had I fled through these woods thinking I was making unique choices? I squeezed between the boulders, scraping my arms and shoulders. The inside felt cooler and damp. I crawled as deep as I could, then curled against the back wall, hardly daring to breathe as the synchronized footsteps passed directly outside. They didn't pause, didn't investigate, continued eastward as if the cave didn't exist. I waited until their footsteps faded completely before risking my flashlight. The beam illuminated a small, unremarkable cave, except for one detail that shocked me. Scratched into the wall beside me were 5 sets of tally marks, each with 4 vertical lines crossed by a diagonal, 20 marks in total. Below them, a message. 5th cycle. Read the journal. My hand trembled as I pulled the leather-bound journal from my pack. The first page contained a list of dates, each crossed out, with my signature below them. The most recent was yesterday's date, in my handwriting, but had no memory of writing it. I turned the page and began to read. If you're reading this, I am you and you are me, and we're both trapped. This is the 5th cycle that I can document. There may have been more before I started leaving myself messages. The journal detailed 4 previous cycles where I experienced similar events. The radio warning, the stranger who vanished, the rangers with identical faces, and always ending with my capture near Tower 12. Each capture somehow reset the timeline, beginning again with that first radio call warning me about unnatural clouds. The voice on the radio is us. One entry explained. Somehow when they reset the cycle, a fragment of our consciousness exists outside their control, like a sound that can repeat backward through their experiment. Each cycle, we're able to communicate a little more clearly with our past self. I read for hours, absorbing the impossible truth. According to my own account, I'd been living the same weeks over and over, with slight variations each time. The journal documented my growing understanding across cycles, how I'd gone from confused victim to active resistor, leaving myself clues and warnings. They're not human, I'd written in the 3rd cycle. They seem to be studying human response to isolation and fear. The experiment always ends at Tower 12, where they capture me and reset everything. The final entry was the most disturbing. I'm writing this as they approach the tower. Fifth cycle ending. If you're reading this, we've created a fracture in their control. The metal box was never discovered in previous cycles. The cave seems to exist in their blind spot. Use these advantages. Break the loop. Reach the eastern highway before the next sunset. Their influence has boundaries. Cross it, and we might finally escape. I closed the journal, feeling shocked. Dawn light filtered through cracks in the cave entrance, marking the passage of night. I'd read until morning without realizing it. I repacked my bag, tucking the journal securely inside, and squeezed back through the gap into the morning forest. Birds chirped overhead. The first natural sound I'd heard in what felt like days. After checking my compass, I circled cautiously back toward my tower. If the Rangers were pursuing me eastward, the tower might be temporarily abandoned. I needed to see it one more time to validate what the journal had told me. The tower was silent in the morning light, door hanging open on broken hinges. I approached cautiously, rifle ready, but sensed no movement inside or around the structure. Climbing the stairs, I found the main room in chaos, my belongings scattered across the floor, equipment smashed beyond repair. They'd methodically destroyed everything they hadn't taken. I stood in the wreckage of my temporary home, a strange calm settling over me. If the journal was accurate, none of this was really mine. I was just passing through a scenario they'd created and reset multiple times. The radio crackled to life on its own, making me jump despite everything I'd read. "Alan, can you hear me?" My voice, my actual voice without distortion this time. I grabbed the handset. "I hear you. I found the journal." "Good. They've set up a perimeter around the forest. The road to the east is your only chance. You must reach it by nightfall or the cycle begins again. I can't help you after this transmission." "Who are they? What do they want?" I asked, desperate for answers beyond what the journal had provided. "We don't know everything. They're not from here. They're studying us. Our fear, our resistance, our adaptability. Each cycle they adjust variables, watching how we respond." The voice, my voice, paused. "You're trapped in their temporal experiment. Your repeated resistance has created a fracture in their control. That's how I can reach you across cycles. Why can't they find the cave? Why didn't they find the metal box? Their perception has limits. They focus on patterns, on what they expect to see. The box was hidden in a way that defied their pattern recognition. The cave exists in some kind of perceptual blind spot, maybe natural to this area. Maybe something about the mineral composition. All that matters is that it works." I glanced out the window toward the eastern horizon. "How far is the boundary?" "About 15 miles in a straight line, rough terrain most of the way. They'll be searching for you, trying to herd you back toward Tower 12. The voice grew urgent. "This is my last transmission. The energy required to maintain this connection across cycles is depleting. If you fail, I won't be able to reach you again with this clarity. And if I succeed, then we break free. And maybe we can help the next person they trap." The radio crackled. "They're coming back. Move now, Alan. Eastward. Don't stop until you cross the highway." The radio stopped working with a final burst of static. This time, no amount of adjusting brought it back to life. I pocketed a few more useful supplies from the wreckage, matches, a candy bar, an extra pair of socks, and secured the journal inside my jacket. The weight of it against my chest felt heavy, but reassuring. Outside, I paused on the landing to get my bearings. The morning sun illuminated the eastern forest where my escape route supposedly was. 15 miles of unknown terrain with inhuman pursuers behind me. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I understood what was happening. I wasn't lost or crazy. I was trapped, but with a clear path to freedom. I took a deep breath and descended the tower stairs one last time. At the bottom, I turned east, compass in hand, and began walking with purpose. The cycle had to end, the loop had to break, and I was the only one who could do it. I set a brutal pace through the eastern forest, the morning light filtering through dense foliage as I navigated by compass. My muscles protested with each step, still sore from the night's frantic escape. But I pushed forward. Freedom waited 15 miles ahead if the journal could be trusted. The first hour passed without incident. Birds called overhead, a deceptively normal soundtrack to my desperate flight. I maintained as straight a line eastward as the terrain allowed, checking my compass obsessively. By mid-morning, subtle changes crept into the landscape. Paths I followed disappeared into solid underbrush. Trees I'd passed seemed to reappear ahead of me. The forest was playing tricks or being manipulated. "They're resisting," I muttered, recalling a passage from the journal. "They can alter perception within their zone." I paused to check my compass again. The needle spun wildly for several seconds before settling back on east. I took a deep breath and pressed on. The sun climbed higher, beating down through breaks in the canopy. My water supply dwindled faster than planned as the day grew unexpectedly hot. 4 hours into my journey, the terrain began sloping upward toward a ridge I didn't recognize from any map. I stopped at a fallen log to rest, pulling out the journal. Flipping to the hastily drawn map inside, I found no mention of a major ridge in this area. Either I'd veered off course or the landscape itself was changing. "Trust the compass, not your eyes," I read from the journal's margins. "The terrain changes to confuse and delay." I drank sparingly from my canteen and pressed eastward, forcing myself to ignore the contradictory landmarks. The ridge that should have taken 20 minutes to climb stretched impossibly for over an hour. When I finally crested it around noon, the view ahead made me freeze. The forest below appeared distorted, as if viewed through heat waves rising from hot asphalt. Trees warped and wavered at impossible angles. The boundary described in the journal stretched across my path, a visible division between this forest and whatever lay beyond. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I'd never reached this point in previous cycles. I took out the journal again, finding the relevant passage. "The barrier causes intense disorientation, physical effects of crossing between their reality manipulation and normal space. Push through it. Don't stop, no matter what." I steeled myself and began descending toward the boundary. With each step, the distortion grew more pronounced. Colors changed unnaturally, greens too vivid, browns too deep. The air felt dense against my skin. At the edge of the distortion, I reached out a trembling hand. The space in front of me pushed back against my fingers before giving way. I stepped forward. Pain exploded behind my eyes. My inner ear rebelled, sending waves of vertigo crashing through me. I stumbled, catching myself against a tree that felt both solid and insubstantial. The forest twisted around me, reality bending in nauseating ways. I forced another step, then another. My body felt wrong, simultaneously too heavy and too light. Bile rose in my throat. "Keep moving," I growled through gritted teeth. The boundary stretched longer than it appeared. What looked like a thin membrane from outside proved to be an agonizing half-mile of distorted space. I lost track of time as I pushed through it, focused only on placing one foot ahead of the other. When I finally emerged on the other side, I collapsed to my knees, gasping. My limbs shook uncontrollably. I vomited until nothing remained but painful dry heaves. Minutes passed before I could raise my head. The forest ahead appeared normal, strikingly so after the warped terrain behind me. Sunlight filtered naturally through branches. Paths cut clearly through underbrush, but something was still wrong. The forest stood utterly silent. No birds called, no insects buzzed, no wind rustled the leaves. The natural world had been silenced. I checked my compass again. It pointed steadily east now, with no spinning or hesitation. I rose on shaky legs and continued my journey. The afternoon stretched into a strange, silent hike through increasingly normal woodland. My map indicated the eastern highway lay approximately 7 miles beyond the barrier. At my current pace, I might reach it by early evening, well before the deadline of sunset mentioned in the journal. 4 hours after crossing the barrier with the sun beginning its westward descent, I paused atop a small rise to gauge my progress. In the distance, perhaps 2 miles away, I spotted movement. A line of green uniformed figures moved methodically through the trees. Rangers, at least 10 of them, made a search line, sweeping the forest in a coordinated pattern. They moved in perfect synchronization, each figure maintaining exact spacing from the others. I dropped to the ground. They were searching for me, creating a human net to capture me before I could reach the highway. The map showed a shallow valley ahead before the final stretch to the road. No alternate routes appeared viable. Any detour would cost precious hours I couldn't afford to lose. I had to get through their line. Staying low, I moved down the slope toward the valley floor. Thick underbrush provided cover as I advanced cautiously toward the ranger line. Their mechanical precision made their movements predictable. They maintained perfectly straight paths, never deviating to check dense undergrowth or natural hollows. I found a depression beneath fallen logs and thick ferns. If I timed it right, I could slip between two rangers as they passed. I lay flat in the hollow, controlling my breathing as the line approached. Green uniforms materialized through the trees, moving with that unnatural synchronization that sent chills down my spine. As they drew closer, I could make out their faces, all identical copies of Kevin. Blank expressions, eyes scanning with machine-like regularity. They passed within 50 yards of my position, then 40, then 30. I pressed myself deeper into the earth, barely breathing. When they were 20 yards away, I noticed a gap in their line, slightly wider than the others. My chance. The rangers passed my position, the gap approaching. I remained frozen, waiting for the perfect moment. When the gap aligned with my hiding spot, I started to move. A fallen branch snapped beneath my boot. The rangers didn't react like humans would, with startled glances or hesitation. Instead, all heads turned simultaneously toward the sound, moving with perfect coordination. I froze again, praying my camouflage would hold. For endless seconds, the entire line stood motionless, scanning. Then, with the same synchronization, they resumed their march. Once they passed, I counted to 30 before slipping from my hiding place and moving perpendicular to their search line. My hands shook with adrenaline and relief. For the next hour, I pushed forward with renewed urgency. The rangers' presence meant I was nearing the boundary of their influence, the eastern highway that represented freedom, but it also meant they knew roughly where I was. The sun hung low in the sky when disaster struck. I rounded a thick stand of pines and nearly collided with a solitary ranger. We both froze, barely 3 feet apart. This close, the wrongness of the entity was unmistakable. It wore Kevin's face, but the skin had an artificial sheen, like high-quality plastic. Its eyes tracked my movement with camera-like precision rather than human fluidity. Most disturbing was the visible seam running along the side of its neck, disappearing beneath the collar of its uniform, as if the skin had been applied over something else entirely. For a heartbeat, we stared at each other. Then I swung my rifle butt upward, catching it beneath its chin. The impact should have knocked a human unconscious. The ranger merely staggered backward, its head tilted at an impossible angle. I ran. Behind me, a sound erupted that wasn't quite human, a high-pitched signal that carried through the trees. The ranger was alerting the others. I abandoned stealth for speed, crashing through underbrush and leaping over fallen logs. My lungs burned, my legs threatened to buckle, but fear drove me forward. Soon I heard them behind me, synchronized footfalls gaining ground with mechanical efficiency. They didn't tire, they didn't slow, they pursued with single-minded purpose. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky orange and red. I pushed my body beyond its limits. Dehydration made my thoughts hazy. Each breath rasped painfully in my throat. I crested a final rise as darkness began to fall in earnest. There, cutting through the forest ahead, the eastern highway. A long strip of asphalt barely visible in the fading light, perhaps half a mile away. So close. I started down the slope, half running, half stumbling. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. They were gaining. As I neared the tree line bordering the highway, I spotted headlights moving along the road. Ranger vehicles patrolled its length, moving slowly in both directions. I had to time this perfectly. I reached the edge of the forest, concealing myself behind the last line of trees. The rangers behind me were close enough that I could hear their synchronized breathing. A patrol vehicle passed on the highway, then another. In the distance, a single pair of headlights approached, not the distinctive profile of a Forest Service vehicle, a civilian truck. My only chance. I summoned my last reserves of strength and burst from the tree line, my legs pumped desperately across the grassy verge separating forest from asphalt. The truck grew larger in my vision. Behind me, I heard the rangers emerge from the trees with that same perfect coordination, their footsteps accelerating to match my sprint. The truck was 50 yards away, 30, 20. I lurched into the road, directly into its path, waving my arms frantically. Brakes screeched as the driver spotted me. The vehicle skidded, tires smoking against asphalt. It stopped barely 10 feet from where I stood, swaying with exhaustion. Behind me, the Rangers closed in. The driver's door opened. An elderly man with a weathered face and shock of white hair emerged, his expression changing from anger to concern. "Good Lord, son, I nearly hit you," he called out, stepping toward me. "Please," I gasped, my voice a ragged whisper. "Help me," I glanced back. The Rangers had reached the edge of the road and stopped. They stood in perfect line at the forest's edge, unwilling or unable to step onto the highway. The old man looked where I was looking, but showed no reaction to the identical figures watching us. Could he even see them? "You look half dead, boy," he said, taking my arm. "Come on, get in." He helped me into the passenger seat of his battered pickup truck. My legs gave out completely as I collapsed into the seat. The journal had been right. They couldn't cross the boundary represented by the highway. As the old man climbed back into the driver's seat, I stared out the window at the Rangers. They remained at the forest edge, watching with emotionless faces. "Thank you," I managed to say as the truck pulled back onto the road. "I thought I was dead." "Been lost in those woods?" the man asked, concern etching deeper lines in his already weathered face. "You're not the first. Something strange about that forest." I looked back through the rear window. In the gathering darkness, the Rangers seemed to waver and distort. As we drove farther away, their figures became translucent, then faded altogether, like mirages dissolving in the night. "You have no idea," I replied. Relief flooded through me so profound it brought tears to my eyes. I'd broken the cycle, escaped their experiment. 5 times they'd reset the loop, wiped my memory, and started their cruel study. This time I'd won. But I knew there would be others, other subjects, other experiments. The entities would continue their work, adapting their methods, refining their approach. Next time, though, there would be someone to help. A voice on the radio offering warnings and guidance. A voice that understood what was happening because it had lived through it. My voice. Exciting news, everyone! I'm thrilled to announce the launch of my new channel dedicated to diverse storytelling. After careful consideration and planning, I've created this space to share a rich collection of stories from different cultures, genres, and perspectives. This new venture represents my commitment to bringing you engaging narratives that inspire, entertain, and broaden our understanding of the world around us. From heartwarming tales to thought-provoking stories, you'll find content that resonates with various interests and experiences. Your support has been the driving force behind everything I create, and I would be incredibly grateful if you could extend that same energy to this new project. Whether it's subscribing, sharing with friends who love good stories, or simply engaging with the content, every bit of support makes a meaningful difference. I believe in the power of storytelling to connect us all, and I'm excited to embark on this new journey with such an amazing community. Your encouragement and feedback have always been invaluable, and I look forward to growing this new space together. Thank you for being part of this incredible journey. Let's create something beautiful together. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Unfortunately, the channel is going through a tough time right now, and we really need your help to keep creating content that you love. If you can, please share our videos with your friends and family and leave a comment to let us know what you think. Every little bit helps and keeps us motivated to bring you more great content. Thanks again for being part of our community, and we hope to see you in the next video.